All right. Welcome back, my beautiful humans, to another episode of Sex, Drugs, and Soul. I almost forgot to say the title of my podcast. It's so funny. I have Dr. Diane on today, and she's coming off fresh off some skee ball. We're going to talk all things relationships, libido. I want to find out what hot monogamy is. I took a peek at her website and I was like, what is that? So I'm coming in a little blind, but I have a list of questions curated too, but open to flow and play, like you said.
Yay, I love it. And I love it. Just lead me where you want. I think there's so much to say. And even just like what we were saying offline around, like, I just came off like skee ball, like kids' school, like playing skee ball with the kids. And here I am. And it's a really good example of like, how do we manage all of the things in life and
Mm,
still cultivate like the time for the passion and the play and the desire and like, no wonder desire fails so much of the time because we're trying to do all these
mm,
things. So I think it's a perfect lead
yeah,
into our convo today.
that's true. Yeah, it seems, or I've experienced where it's like if I'm going and doing certain things, it's like the desire or the sex, it falls on the back burner, like it's not on the forefront or something. And so, yeah, I'd love to explore, like what hot monogamy is, or how do you define it, or like how one can manage that scheduling thing. And
Yeah, let's go there. So, to take us down that journey, let's go back to a journey in time and really talk about like monogamy and like where monogamy came from to begin with.
mm, mm,
So, if we look at ancient cultures, and this is how I would define traditional monogamy. So, this is, kind of an answer to your question around like, what is hot monogamy? What is modern monogamy? So, traditional monogamy is what everybody thinks of. And traditional monogamy, we can date back to even pre Greek and Roman time.
mm,
But Greeks and Romans did a really good job of saying, like, okay, this is the new kind of like legal and societal norms. And they really were preaching that monogamy was for everybody except for the elites. And the
mhm.
elites could, have their
Oh,
concubines and excess lovers and, all of that. So it was like monogamy was for like,
really?
yeah, uh-huh. Interesting, right?
What? Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
So like all the commoners did monogamy, all the elites did whatever they want, essentially. And so then bring in Christians and Christianity, and
Uh-huh.
that's where like more the monogamy from a standpoint of like dogma and stability and just kind of like it was all about like stability and traditions and raising kids. And so it was all around like children and
Mhm.
that family unit, again, stability. Monogamy was also taught a lot, like, it was a huge movement during, like, the agricultural time period, in
Mm,
part around, like, we have to have kids and we have to these large families and we have to stay together
mm,
because
mhm.
we have agricultural demands.
Yeah, we need some hands on the farm.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
exactly right. And we see that in the industrial age too. It's like, but everything was all about, like, that stability of the family. How do we get as many jobs done as possible? Everybody has their roles. And that's like the foundation of monogamy. So if we like are taking a step into that and we're like, okay, but where in any of that is
Mhm,
passion, is
mm,
pleasure, is desire, is like talk about sex other than like a lot of obligation and duty, right?
mhm, mhm,
So modern and hot monogamy, the way I define it, is really about saying, yes, like there's beautiful parts to all this stability, great foundation, but it shouldn't be at expense of the passion, the
mhm,
desire, the
mhm.
pleasure. So it's saying keeping all of that stuff that I personally believe is fundamentally great. Like I love being in a stable relationship, but then adding all the hotness, adding all the pleasure, adding all the passion to it. So
Mhm,
that's why we're calling it hot and modern monogamy, because it's like kind of like a step, like a branch beyond the way that traditional
mhm.
monogamy has been taught.
So how do it's like it's curious I'm curious how, so if they're in a traditional kind of monogamous relationship, how do they start opening up to the conversations or expressing, or what framework do you suggest or do you use with people for those conversations or expression of desires? Because I know that can be super tender and vulnerable if it's like something they've been holding in, even if it's with their long-term and stable partner.
Oh, it's incredibly true, because so it's so interesting, Kristen, like what we see in conflict conversations and in research on conflict, that if if a couple's having conflict about anything, like not sex, just anything, just argument, day to day, not getting
Mhm.
along, there's three threats that come up.
Hmm.
One threat to one person, the other person, and then the threat to like the relationship, right?
Mhm.
But what's super interesting about sex and about sexual intimacy is if it's a non-sex thing, all three of those threats are kind of equal. But if it's regarding sex, there's one of those three threats that is substantially more, which is the threat to the individual, which
Mhm.
basically means if my partner and I have a conversation about sex, like without training, what tends to happen is I am most interested in protecting myself. He is most interested in protecting himself. So everybody is on guard because we're all trying to protect ourselves.
Mhm.
And so it's really difficult. And we'll talk about what to do here and answer your question. But it is really difficult because there is this natural tendency, for the ego to get so impacted because we're all trying
Mhm.
to protect ourselves. And I theorize sometimes, and other people in the sex field too, theorize that maybe there's this like evolutionary reason for it around like innately the subconscious knows that if we are not doing this right, we might not procreate and spread our seed and all those things. And
Mhm.
maybe that's true, maybe it's not, but regardless, what I do believe is true for a lot of people is that threat to themselves. So
Mhm.
that's something we have to go into and really be aware of.
Mhm. I was listening to someone speak at a at the conference earlier, and she's kind of mentioned like three phases of love about how like you're in, first off maybe innocence, and it's like you're a full yes to love. And I distinctly remember like my very first heartbreak where it was like I was full yes, and this is, I had written the future of our lives together and what our little babies were gonna look like and all this stuff. And then when that's broken, then we go into like a armored up kind of phase. And so I feel like a lot of people are operating in an armor phase. And then the third phase that I think it was Christina Weber, or Christine Weber, I don't know, but said the third phase is like reclaiming vulnerability, and it's kind of speaks to like what you're talking about too about having a dialogue or opening up or the protection of self and the armor or like the power struggle type of thing.
Yeah, exactly right. Are you talking Christina Weber of We
Yes,
Deepen? Yes,
yes,
yes, yes.
yes,
She's
yes,
awesome. I
yes.
love her. I
Okay,
love her
yes.
work. Yeah, so exactly. I mean, these are definitely phases and things that we all need to really be aware of. And in order to think about this, right? In order to think about like the
Mhm,
curiosity and the vulnerability and all
mhm,
these phases of it, a lot of it is I think there's an element of first being curious enough to even want to have the conversation, right? And
mm,
so I think sometimes we don't even have the conversation because if we go further back from like the root cause perspective, which I'm always interested in, like what's really at the bottom of all
yeah,
this, right? Let's dig in. And if we go far back enough, oftentimes we, like so many people, have these little tiny things and everything is just swept under the rug. And the number of sometimes I hear people say things like, well, sex just isn't that interesting. We've decided we
mm,
don't do that. And I'm not saying that that's not something that like maybe some couples come to that decision. There's no judgment there, but it's more around like if there's coming to that decision, oftentimes like what I have found, it's because it hasn't gone well, or we've tried talking about it and that hasn't gone well. And it's
mhm,
almost this like passive acceptance, which in some ways is better than like not acceptance at all. But I
mhm,
think that's one of the first things is like, okay, well, being curious and like, what is a lot of people will talk about, and I totally agree with this, like, what is that why? What is that fundamental reason why talking about this is important? Why this is beneficial to the relationship? Why you're interested in it? Excuse me. I'm gonna tickle my throat. And so with that, then we go into the conversation around that, kind of with that grounding of, oh yeah, I this is worth it. This is worth figuring this out. And I have like a kind of a three step guideline I can
mm,
go to on like how to have these conversations. But before we even have those and go into those three steps, which I'll go into a second, the biggest thing is like, okay, why is this valuable to me? Why
mm,
is this worth the risk?
mm,
And when we do that, and we can have like our partner do that, and if they're willing to do
mhm.
that, we often realize there's more similarities, than differences.
Yeah, I think that's kind of across the board, whether we're looking at
Yeah.
relationships, politics, or, all kinds of things. Like if
Yes,
we just
exactly.
recognize our commonality or where we can find common ground, I think that a
Yeah.
lot of things can shift.
It's amazing how many times we argue, in life, and we actually as humans have like similar core values. We just have different ways of going at it,
Or yeah, even the language to describe it. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, it's so true. It's so true. So, you want me to talk about like the three
Sure, sure.
guidelines?
Yeah, I love 3 guidelines. I'm also curious about common root causes. So whatever you're feeling like is pulled to express next.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll give level three guidelines, and we can
Yeah.
go
I mean,
into
I'd
root
love
causes
like
too.
yeah.
So three guidelines. So
Mhm.
when, where, how. So when is, let's start with where actually. Where
Okay.
is the easiest to understand? So, where is basically thinking about very simple. Don't have the conversations in the places that you want
Mm,
to be intimate or you have
mm,
been intimate most commonly. So, for
hmm,
most people, that's the bedroom.
mhm,
So, we don't want to have conversations there that might have a little charge or have potential to
mm,
go wrong because, especially when it comes to sex and lovemaking, what can happen is then we go back into the bedroom and our brain is a memory making machine, right? We like quickly grow new neurons when we have these traumatic things, and hopefully it's not going to go, poorly. But if it does, and that memory is in the bedroom, then there's going to be this tie of like,
mm,
oh, crap, this was like really, really intense. And now I'm in the bedroom, the place where I'm supposed to be sensual and ready to get sexy.
mhm,
And now I have that memory. So
mm,
that's a simple one.
mhm,
When is also pretty simple from a standpoint of with when I really find that it's great to give your partner a heads up, but not in the
mm.
honey, I gotta talk kind of way,
Yeah.
because that sends the red flags up. So, how I recommend giving a heads up is something like this. Hey, honey, I was listening to this really cool podcast the other day, and it really made me interested in just like having a conversation about
Mm,
having better sex or about our intimate life. And I have some really fun ideas from this podcast that I'm really excited to share.
mm, mhm,
So, is there a time we could do that? So I'm still setting them up for like letting them know this is not like we're not just talking about where we're going to plant, the summer
mhm.
roses or whatnot, and we're going to actually have this
Are you
conversation. So they go into it knowing, but at the same time, they're also not, they don't, the guard's not up. Like they know they're not in trouble at
mhm,
the same time. And
mhm,
then it still puts them in position where it's like, hey, today's not a good day. It's a long day. So they still have
mhm,
choice in it.
mhm.
And the caution on the when, though, is I've seen people where they take it too far and then it's never the good time.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Like
Okay.
it's not the perfect time today. And now I'm not in the mood. And now it's hard. Like at some point, we just have to rip the band aid off if we're ever going to have the
Mhm. Like, are
conversation.
you ever gonna feel 100% ready?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. It's kind of like buying a house. Like
Yeah, or
basically,
getting a
it's like,
puppy.
yeah,
No, no.
yes, exactly. You want to, you want to, you want to, and it's going to be really hard.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
So then the how is all about kind of the framing and the languaging. So
Mhm.
what I encourage people to do in the how is focus on what you love and what you want more of.
Mm,
And the
mhm,
more specific you can be, the better. So it's
mm,
like, honey, the way you kissed my neck, or the
mhm,
way you put me in this position, that was so good. And we stayed there for only, 2 seconds before we moved on. And I could have just lingered there for hours, those kind of things.
mhm,
And I'm not saying that we don't want to tell our partner things that we don't want. That is also important. But usually in the beginning, if we're not practicing this, usually a good place to start is just starting with, hey, these are the things I love, and
mhm,
asking for more of them. And if we can
mhm,
start there, then the immediate response from a partner is like, well, I can provide that. Look at all the things
mhm,
that I'm doing well. And
mm,
then some of the things you don't like will naturally fall away if we focus on the things we love.
mhm,
Typically I find we do still have to bring those up, but if we can do it like later on when that is more developed, and then in a way once we've said the good things, and we say like, hey, I'm just I'm finding that there's things that I don't, that maybe used to serve my body or I used to like, and I'm just not liking them as much anymore. And like,
mhm,
you're not doing anything wrong. Just like all of a sudden, I'm not responding anymore. Like, can I share
mhm.
that? So I'm like, it's like we can say it in a way where we're not making them wrong,
Yeah.
you
Yeah,
know?
for sure. Owning our desires and also, and allowing and giving permission also to ourselves, and to let them know, like, hey, we're individuals and we evolve and grow over time. So something I thought loved and thought was hot in my 20s, I'm really lacking this more of this sensual or soft or slow or more firm kind of touch, like to, and so I think that's a good little framework for people to carry into relationships.
Well, and the point you made is really important. I think this can even go into the conversation as well, which is our bodies change. Like,
Mm-hmm.
so many people, like statistics have shown that there's a huge uptick in the couples that try anal sex in their 40s.
Mm.
Right. So it's like super. And I think, there's some thought on that. Like, well, maybe that's because 40s tend to, people, like, the older we get, the more, confident we get as humans. So I don't think it's just that the body's changed, but I do think that's part of it around, like, oh, you're more curious. The body has
Mm-hmm.
different needs. You want to try more things. So I think the more too, we can just like bring that around, like, hey, this doesn't have to be like anybody's right or wrong or good or bad. It's as simple as, like, wow, like, literally our bodies and our needs change and they go through phases. And if we can make it about
Mm-hmm.
that, it's
Oh
like
yeah,
so
like
much
I mean
easier.
hormones, babies,
Right. Right.
like all kinds of
Puppies, like you
things.
said.
Yeah, all kinds of things. Um,
Yeah.
I'm curious if what if one partner is sitting with a desire to possibly explore, like, and I know it's like hot monogamy, but maybe one kind of followed the path of traditional monogamy or religious frameworks or pressure to fit into like a certain standard, but yet they maybe want to explore like bringing someone into their dynamic or opening up in that capacity. Does that fit within this framework, or what would you suggest to someone that's sitting with that kind of desire that they're just maybe a little bit crunchy or shame even, or scared to express?
Oh, there's lots of things I would say. Like,
Okay, okay.
many, many things.
Okay.
One of the first things is, like, while, like, my work is really focused on hot monogamy, and that's kind of
Mhm,
like my personal passion, by no means do I think this is like the right framework for everybody.
mhm,
It's more like the number one thing I think is about making choice that is best for you and your
mhm,
relationship, and realizing that even in that choice, there could be times where you might have a different choice, right?
mhm,
I've tried polyamory twice in my life. Like,
mhm.
both times I led to the same conclusion. Like, I'm like, this is not the style for me.
Yeah.
And but it was, for me, it was helpful to go through that, to actually explore the good, the
Mhm,
bad, the challenge, the rewards, the benefits, the
mhm,
strengths, to land where I have. And I think for couples, like the biggest thing is, one, it's back to the why, right? Because sometimes if one person is wanting something different than the other, there can be something to be said around, like, okay, well, sometimes people do want different relationships, styles, and that's an important thing to actually probably sit down with a therapist with.
mhm,
But a
mhm,
lot of times, if we get back to, like, why, what is the underlying root? Is it that
mm,
we just, we want more friendships? I've actually met
mhm,
people that have gone
mhm.
poly just because of that. That doesn't have to mean sex,
Yeah.
it could be that we want more novelty, that we're bored.
Mm,
40,
mm,
some surveys have
mhm.
said that 40% of long-term couples are bored. Like,
Oh, yeah.
that's
I
a
mean, I feel
lot.
like, yeah, and I think you can bring in novelty in many different ways. I mean,
Yes.
like, I've got an active imagination. You're really only limited by your imagination
Right.
in some aspects.
Right.
And it doesn't have to include necessarily another person to that dynamic.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you, so I have a free guide. So if you go to
Mhm.
mysexdoc.com, I have a yes, no, maybe checklist.
Hmm.
And so that's a really fun thing to do in this list, like an answer to this question too, where if people are like, wow, I am kind of wanting different things than my partner, we're not trying to do this. It's a fun way to go through, and you do the checklist, your partner does the checklist. You see what yeses you have in common, you see what nos you have in common.
Mhm.
And then maybes, the way to sort through maybes is to have a conversation and say, okay, well, what makes a maybe? What would make a maybe safe and a yes?
Mm.
And what would actually make a maybe like a hard no? because sometimes there's
Mhm.
nuances,
Oh, for
right?
sure. Yeah.
So that's a really fun way to get back on, on a similar page. It might not
Mhm.
always be the same page, but I don't find it has to be the same page in order for a relationship to work. It just has to be overlapping enough, with
Mhm.
enough desire to be together and that foundational why to be similar enough to be on the same page.
Yeah, and I kinda like looking at it or approaching it with the playfulness aspect. I love any kind of, like, gamifying something, so if I'm like, "You go okay, go do your list, and I'm gonna do my list, and then we'll get together, and we'll, like, cross compare," or, like, you know how back in school, like, you trade or, like, maybe maybe see, I don't know. It just kinda makes me think of that. Um, I just think the playfulness aspect, it kinda takes a lot of the pressure off of, like, "Oh, okay, I can breathe."
Well, yeah, and like, you're saying you have an active imagination, and so do I. And I know so many people, like, and I even see this with myself too. Like, I have a very good imagination, but when I get in the stress of life and like the brain gets in this
Mm.
more linear focus, it is harder for me to access like the creativity, like side of my brain.
Mhm.
So it's just another way I think to help people break free from that. And here's the other fun play part of that I love, which is like once you find things that you're like, oh yeah, we want to try this, then
Mm.
it gives you material to flirt about. So then you can set up like what I
Mm.
call bougie sex date nights, and you can like try your new
Ah.
little thing. And they're like, oh, yeah, we're going to have our bougie sex date night next Saturday. And then all week long, it brings the flirt back, right? Because so many times in long term relationships, it's like, even the communication can become mechanical. So it's like,
Mhm.
oh, now it's like, oh, I'm so excited for this thing, and we're going to wear this, and we're going to try this thing. And it just allows for material to come back to start flirting again.
Mhm. I like the idea that you said to, like setting a date and time for it. Because I know that I've, heard some pushback. We're like, "Oh, I don't wanna have to plan for it." But I'm like, "We plan for so much in our lives. Why not plan for that intentional time to connect and be intimate with our partner or as well?"
Well, and it's so funny. Like, people are often like, "Well, Dr. Diane, I don't know that I want to schedule sex, and it just seems like it's supposed to be a spontaneous and all these things." And but here's the thing. Here's what I've realized. So when people start dating, you have like your date night on Thursday, and then are they going to call me? And then okay, we have our second date, and okay, maybe we have our first kiss somewhere, and oh, now we're going to have our first sleepover, and every single one of those things was planned.
Mm.
It is
Mhm.
an extremely rare thing that in a new relationship, someone's just gonna pop
Mm.
over and you're just gonna like make love on the fly,
Yeah.
right? Like, not saying that
True.
can't happen,
Yeah, I don't want
but
anybody to just pop over.
me neither. Me
I'm
neither.
like,
I'm not a pop over kind of
it's a
gal.
hard no.
Like, that's
I might send you home. At the very least,
me
give you a
too.
spanking.
Right.
You know?
Then they'll come back for sure.
That's
um, yeah. So that's one of these
so true.
things where it's like I help people to, I want people to realize like, actually, we've been planning in the beginning part of a relationship. We've been planning our date nights, our intimacy
Mhm,
nights, our sex dates. All of that has largely been planned, and it's only when
mhm,
we get serious and we move in together and we like combine resources and households, and we just start integrating lives where we share calendars, sometimes all the things.
mhm,
And that's when we just like think like, well, we're going to see each other all the time, so it's supposed to not have to be
mm,
scheduled.
mm,
So, there's also an interesting correlation, right? If you look at the timing of that, of, well, usually when the relationship gets to that point, the intimacy, the passion is like starts to dying, which actually correlates timing wise to when we no longer schedule it anymore.
that's interesting.
Hmm.
Mm, that made me think of something. I just had a little brain fart. I was like, "Where was I gonna go?" Oh, yeah. It reminded me, like, like, if I'm helping someone, say, outline a book or something, it's like, I'm like, I advocate for outlining a book because it gives the masculine structure for the feminine flow, creative energy to, like, transpire. And so it's like if you have the date and time, you have the container, and then you can play and flow and connect in that aspect.
Well, exactly. It's not saying that there's not room for spontaneity,
Yeah,
right? It's
yeah.
saying that, hey, we are just committing to show up at this
Mhm,
time. Then what
mhm,
happens at that time, there's still plenty of room for spontaneity. And I do agree. Like, if we look at like Taoist roots or Chinese medicine roots, which is some of my background, um,
oh, cool.
we really see that like the feminine is the yin, and the feminine like really is about kind of like that container, that structure to house all of that fiery energy. And so some of having that structure and that container, like you're saying, allows in many cases for, for the woman to relax. And, I've seen this in
Mhm.
my own life around just like realizing and knowing like, okay, we have our sexy date night, our next sexy date night here. And when I'm like exhausted and I really want to show up to myself and my partner this way, it helps me in those moments where it's like, okay, it's okay for me to go to bed. It's okay for me to rest because I know this is still being prioritized. My relationship's still getting prioritized.
Mm.
He knows he's getting prioritized. So I feel
Mm.
like it just gives us almost like ease to the
Mm.
relationship that way around just, it almost takes like the pressure off in some
Yeah.
ways.
No, I love that you mentioned sleep too. I'm like, anything
Yeah.
that'll help with
Yeah.
that.
I'm 45. I'm on my sleep.
Heck yeah, me too. I'm like, I'm 37 and I'm like, that's one of my top priorities.
Right.
I'm a 7 to 10 girly. I'm like, when I
That is
can.
my style too.
Yeah. Love the horizontal vibes in many aspects.
Yes, all of them.
Yeah. I wanna kinda like, I'm like switching gears, like, I wanna talk about libido a little bit too,
Yeah.
since I have you here. Like maybe if someone's struggling with low libido or if, like what are some of the common roots Boudreaux, come back. I haven't talked to my waist. Common like root causes of low libido, or what do you suggest for that if they just can't seem to, get their engines revving, so to speak?
Yeah. There's when I've looked at this,
Mhm.
there's like a bazillion causes for, true low libido. And I typically do not see one root cause.
Mm.
The categories that we can arrange most of the root causes are into three different categories. One's the physical,
Mm.
one's the personal, one's the interpersonal.
Mm.
And I find oftentimes there's an element of all three pillars in any low libido scenario. Not every time. It can mix and match, of course.
Mhm.
But so to go through kind of like the pillars kind of more one by one, on the physical side of things, and this is another great quiz I have for your audience. So if your
Oh.
audience goes to libidoquiz.com,
Mhm.
you'll actually see a really cool quiz where it will go through the physical root causes that I'm about to go through. And you'll take questions and it'll spit out the top one or two root causes that are likely happening to you.
Mm.
And then you'll get a follow up email with lab test
Mm.
suggestions for you to ask your doctor about,
Mm.
because a lot of times people are not getting full and complete labs to really
Mm.
rule out these root causes.
Mm.
So, under the physical side, the top five are hormones, obviously. And even within the context of that, and this is some of what I teach in my work, like a lot of people, for example, will get their testosterone run. And testosterone is probably the most commonly known cause, low testosterone of low libido. But what a lot of people don't realize is that testosterone levels have declined about 40% in the past 45 years. So, like,
Mm.
what that means is like in medicine, where we have like that range of your normal, we've actually moved that range 40% lower.
Mm.
So oftentimes people are falling in this normal range, but it's just because so many people have low testosterone, meaning if you're what you really want and you really want to look for is being in that upper end of that range. And when you're in that upper end of that range, now we know you're normal. So in
Mm.
that upper end of that range, that's what you're looking for on lab tests, right? So you can have a normal lab test, but still be in the lower end of the range and technically still have low testosterone,
Okay.
right? You
Okay.
following
Yeah.
me?
Yeah, a little bit. A little bit. Boudreaux was kind of like, I'm sure that they'll follow you. But I'm
Okay.
like, yeah. Yeah. I was like, let me put him in my lap so he'll be a little. Hey, Craig, come here.
Puppies have their own
I
their own
know. And
agendas for
I
sure.
didn't want to put him back in his crate because I was at that conference all day. So we'll just get some cute little puppy vibes to our
Oh,
dynamic.
so cute. That sounds
Yeah,
great.
Rico just wants to talk. He just had actually was neutered, so he's gonna have a lower libido too.
Okay.
So no.
um, that will happen. Yep, that will happen. That's
Yeah.
a big cause.
Yeah.
So hormones, stress is another big one. Pelvic
Mm,
floor dysfunction. So like, and this is
mm,
another thing where like people are taught to do Kegels. So many
Mm,
people are doing Kegels wrong, and Kegels are really only half the
mm.
problem because Kegels are all about tightening. And you add a lot of people have pelvic floor
Ah,
problems, which be linked to low libido from their muscles not relaxing enough,
yeah.
right? It's like holding your bicep in a bicep curl all day and only
Mhm,
doing that. Like you never would never just contract. You would always like undo the curl and relax. Sometimes we do pulsing, right? And you can do
mhm,
that, but you still want to do that stretching for proper muscle
mhm,
function. So that's a big one. Your neurological system's a big one. And this is where we can get into things like vaginal numbness, for
mm,
example, and difficulty orgasming, even because we get change in that neurological signal to the vagina, and that can make a
mhm,
difference with anything from passion, desire, feeling, lubrication, all of that.
mhm.
And then we have circulation as well. So if we're not getting that blood flow, right, that
Mm,
can really
mhm,
lead to problems. So those are the top physical things. Other things in the physical realm, though, are things like chronic kidney infections,
mm.
inflammation. There's a lot of toxins that have been, implicated in low libido. So that's all physical part,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah. I was
It,
curious from just even physical too, where the nervous system regulation or like kind of like when you said the bicep curl thing, I was thinking about just like the nervous system that's not being able to relax and really even receive the pleasure that may be available to them if they're kind of like in a different state that won't allow the like relaxing part of it.
oh, it's 100% true.
I guess
I've
what
been
more parasympathetic.
Well, yeah, that's more sympathetic, in
Yeah,
the fight or flight, right?
yeah.
So I was actually doing just kind of putting together my one of my next YouTubes that I'm making, which is
Mm,
on the concept of productivity as a trauma
mm,
response.
mm. Oh,
And so
present.
present too. Oh yeah, this is something I'm majorly healing from. I am
Yeah.
very aware of this pattern in me.
Yeah.
It has been for decades my biggest coping
Mhm.
mechanism.
Mhm.
And I think this is actually a very common thing. I think men and women have this, but I do think it's probably a little more common in women.
Mm.
And as a way of saying, hey, we're not going to look at whatever is challenging. And instead, it's so much easier to just be like, well, I can deal with that emotion, or I can just do something that feels healthy ish,
Mhm.
right? It's not over drinking. It's not, overusing weed or anything like that. It's like, it's actually saying, hey, I'm going to put this back into my work.
Mhm.
Right. And so it's really easy from that standpoint to be in this, hey, I'm not feeling safe, or I haven't dealt with this emotion, or there's a trauma here. So I'm going to cope in this way.
Mm.
And then what happens is we end up in that fight or flight, that sympathetic dominance. And it is, just like think about it, like it is impossible to deeply experience pleasure, to deeply experience an orgasm if our mind is thinking about the to-do list, the grocery list, our
Mm.
fat rolls, whatever
Mm.
it is, right? Like
Mhm.
we can't have an orgasm, we can't experience pleasure in that. So there's like that neurological wiring is essential. I'm really curious. There's these fairly newish vagal nerve stimulators that have been
Mm.
out on the market, where you can use these stimulators against your neck, for example, and they
Mm.
stimulate the vagal nerve. So
Mm.
I'm really curious to see, for people that are more in that productivity state, where it's like hyper productive, and using that
Mhm.
to not sit in the calmness, not sit
Yeah.
in the pleasure. If we actually use the vagal nerve stimulators, what that will
Mhm.
do from that nervous system component too.